And I think we have to ask, do today's Marxist activists have any reason to say that they hate above anyone else in the world the church leaders most celebrated by our cultural elites? Or do they find that their efforts are not only not hampered by Christian cultural elites, but are in fact helped by them?
Megan Basham of the Daily Wire, speaking at the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case conference.
We must resist the infiltrators and use our power in such a way that when those who oppose the cause of Christ are asked who they hate most in the world, they think of our names.
You can watch Megan Basham making the case against progressive influence in the church from this year's Making the Case conference. For a contribution of $250 by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to watch the entire conference. Learn more at issuesetc.org.
Pro-life incumbents have done very well since Dobbs. Not one pro-life incumbent has lost a statewide race.
Margaret Thatcher very famously said, socialism works great until you run out of other people's money. In the Islamic system, the system works great until you run out of the infidels' money.
I love this quotation from Luther. He says, "Spare me from a church in which there are no sinners." The essential character of being a Christian is to be a redeemed sinner.
If we are Christians and we suffer, is that so unbelievable that we should bear a splinter of Jesus' cross after he has gone through so much as a perfect one?
Hospice nurses driving around from patient to patient love listening to Issues Etc.
Of course, there were red flags even during the U.S. Senate confirmation hearings for Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her refusal to define what a woman is, deferring to biologists to answer that question, made many wonder whether she was qualified to hear some of the cases that were inevitably going to appear before the U.S. Supreme Court. Nonetheless, she was confirmed, and now we are reaping, well, the fruits of that particular decision. Greetings and welcome to Issues Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for tuning us in live on this Tuesday afternoon, the 7th of July. We're going to be talking about U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and gender ideology with Glenn Stanton, a focus on the family. We'll be in part 3 of our series on divorce and remarriage, talking about adjudication of marriage with Dr. Benjamin Mays, author of the Issues Etc. Book of the Month, Divorce and Remarriage, Ecclesiastical Discernment, and Pastoral Care. In hour 2, we'll look forward to Sunday morning according to the one-year lectionary, talking with Pastor Will Whedon about Christ coming to fulfill the law in Matthew chapter 5. Glenn Stanton is Director of Family Formation Studies for Focus on the Family, author of a recent column for The Federalist titled Ketanji Brown Jackson is neither a biologist nor a qualified justice. Glenn, welcome back.
It's good to be with you, Todd. Thanks, man.
Refresh our memory. How did Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson come to be on the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, she's the newest member on the court, and she came to the highest court in our land because President Joe Biden made a campaign promise that one of the first things that he would do when an opening came up on the Supreme Court was to appoint a black woman. So it wasn't, I'm going to appoint the best, absolute, smartest justice I can. I'm going to play race and gender games, and I'm going to appoint a black woman. And Ketanji Brown Jackson was the woman that he picked.
What were some red flags during Jackson's confirmation hearings before the U.S. Senate?
Well, I mean, she's a bright woman. She has accomplished much in her life, but she is not one of the brightest members of the Supreme Court or, has ever been considered because she is kind of like shot through with gender ideology. And that came very clear through in her confirmation hearings when a senator from Tennessee asked her if she could define what a woman is. And she said, "No, I can't. I am not a biologist," which is interesting because she was like tilting her head toward gender ideology in that answer. She knew that because of the political background that she comes from, she couldn't answer that question, but she should have known that's not a biological question. That is a gender identity question. So even in that, she sort of flubbed the question in allegiance to leftist politics. But that showed very clearly that she does not really understand what she is about or what she's supposed to be about as a quote-unquote progressive or liberal member of the Supreme Court.
So tell us about the case of Becky Pepper Jackson in West Virginia.
Yeah, Becky Pepper Jackson is a 16-year-old high school athlete, and in middle school and in high school, he has been displacing good, competitive female athletes. In fact, he has displaced more than 470 girls over 1,400 competitions in West Virginia. He stole 2 regional and 1 state championship from highly deserving female athletes. He is a male, a biological male, but he presents and believes himself to be a woman. What's stunning about this is that Kristen Wagner, who is the CEO and president of the Alliance Defending Freedom, one of the organizations that helped fight this case before the Supreme Court, said that Pepper Jackson threatened female athletes. Todd, I can't even describe the way that he threatened them, but basically to assault them with his male genitalia. He did this in locker rooms, on high school and middle school locker rooms. So his mother says, "Oh, my child is a girl." No, he's a male. He's a boy. And he has been competing as a girl and, again, displacing very hard-working female athletes who have the dream of winning their competitions, but they can't compete against this physical male who Pepper Jackson is.
In the majority opinion, when this came before the Supreme Court, you say that the justices chose not to play the gender ideology language game. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it was really wonderful because the strong decision, the majority justices that voted against us defining a person's identity by just their gender identity, they were notoriously clear about what biology is. And as I write in my piece, the majority thankfully never referred to this sexually abusive boy as transgender nor by female pronouns. They simply referred to him as BPJ by those 3 initials, and they choose not to play the gender ideology language game. And so that is very, very good. It's not a whole lot to ask, but in today's political atmosphere, it takes a bit of strength to say, no, we are not going to play the gender ideology game, and that's what the majority justices in this case did.
Is the same true for the minority opinion from Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson?
Todd, it is not. They fell all over themselves to play the gender ideology game. They described PPJ as transgender and just a girl who just wants to compete just like any other girl and used female pronouns and acted as if it's just a clear biological fact that Pepper Jackson is indeed a girl, and isn't it unfair that he can't compete as a girl? So the 2 sides of the Supreme Court, and that's what was so striking here, they're both describing a reality in different ways. The majority held to biological reality, and the majority, the 3 justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, just absolutely adhered to gender ideology.
What about Justice Jackson's in her solitary dissent? Did she go further?
Well, she did go further, and it was really quite dramatic. I mean, she felt that she wanted to say more than her 2 liberal justices, her 2 liberal peers on the Supreme Court, Sotomayor and Kagan. They went far enough, but Jackson wanted to go further. In fact, there's just 6 short little paragraphs that she wrote in her dissent, and she used the term sex assigned at birth or assigned male at birth 13 times in the brief 6-paragraph dissent. And this is really what bothered me, and this is what caused me to write my piece for the Federalist, is here you have a Supreme Court justice using terms like sex assigned at birth and assigned male at birth as if that is a thing. It's not a thing. It's a made-up thing based on gender ideology. And again, she used it 13 times in her brief 6-paragraph dissent.
How did Justice Jackson's dissent, to your way of thinking, prove her unqualified to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, and I even hate to say it for somebody who sits on our Supreme Court, but she's operating outside of reality. And you know what? Nobody on the Supreme Court liberal or conservative, I don't care what your position is. Like, you have to operate in the realm of reality. And using terms like sex assigned at birth means that she is shot through with gender ideology. Nobody is assigned their sex at birth. Every part of the human body is sexed, either male or female. Those are the only two options. Our DNA says that. The first two cells that start dividing, and that's where human life begins, those cells are sexed. They are either male or female. So a baby doesn't come out of the womb and the doctors just say, oh my goodness, we don't know what this is. We'll just assign it as either male or female. They look at the genitalia, and the genitalia usually is an indicator of what the chromosomal makeup of the individual is. And so this silly phrase, sex assigned at birth, shows, and she uses this, again, 13 times in her brief little dissent, shows that she is not qualified to be a part of the highest court of our land that has to operate in facts and reality. She is not operating within facts and reality.
So for some context, what have many Democrats promised to do to the Supreme Court if they're able to do so in the future?
Well, that's a great question, Todd, because they do not like the present makeup of the court with, I wouldn't even call them necessarily conservative justices, but justices that are operating by rational thinking and biological reality. But what Democrats have promised to do when they get control is to what they call packing the courts. Now, the Constitution does not define how many members of the court, the Supreme Court, there will be. Since 1869, there have been 9 justices. And court packing is basically the effort to expand the number of justices. And so you're packing the court with people that Congress wants to put in there. And by giving more members of the court, you're watering down the power of each justice and more likely to get liberal decisions coming out of the court. So that's precisely what Democrats have promised they will do when they get control of Congress and Senate, is they will pack the court, which will water down the court and give us far more problematic decisions that we see. I mean, we in this country, we live in a government of balanced power. We have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The judicial is a bulwark against legislative activism, but packing the court would make the court an activist sort of court. And we saw that in Roe v. Wade. We've seen that in a number of other things. In fact, I think we saw that in the birthright citizenship thing. But the court, for the most part, has been operating pretty responsibly over the last couple of years, and it needs to continue to do that.
Justice Jackson was recently featured on the cover of Essence magazine as, quote, the people's champion. What's wrong with this way of talking about a sitting Supreme Court justice?
That cover is really remarkable, and I'm glad you brought that up. The problem with referring to a sitting justice is a justice is not the people's advocate. A Supreme Court justice has one job, and that is to interpret the United States Constitution correctly. They are not advocates for anybody. They are an advocate for the truth of the Constitution itself. Legislators are people's activists or advocates. You know, your representative where you live, my representatives here in Colorado, they exist to serve what is best for me as a constituent. Supreme Court justices or no judge on any court should be an advocate for people. They should be an advocate for law. And that is how the left sees the court, as a legislative court, an activist court, to do the things that they think that it should do, rather than actually and rightfully interpreting the Constitution itself and law as it's written.
Glenn Stanton is Director of Family Formation Studies for Focus on the Family, author of a recent column for The Federalist titled Ketanji Brown Jackson is Neither a Biologist Nor a Qualified Justice. You can read it on the podcast page for this episode at issuesetc.org. Glenn, thanks.
Todd, thank you.
We will continue our series on divorce and remarriage with Dr. Benjamin Mays, author of the book Divorce and Remarriage, Ecclesiastical Discernment and Pastoral Care, talking about how the nuts and bolts of how a congregation ought to deal with divorce and remarriage.
We're going to have to be vigilant on two different fronts. We're going to have to defend the truth about the human person, made in the image and likeness of God, created male and female, created for marriage. We're also going to have to defend our freedom to live according to those truths.
Dr. Ryan Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center and member of the White House Religious Liberty Commission, speaking at this year's Issues Etc. Making the Case conference.
Over and over again, we're going to see that we have to form the next generation of our students, of our children, our grandchildren to believe the truth, while also defending our freedom to live it out. And then the long game is reforming our civil laws to reflect the truth.
You can watch Ryan Anderson's presentation, Making the Case for Social Conservatism, from the 2026 Issues Etc. Making the Case conference. For a donation of $250 by Labor Day, we'll send you a link to watch an on-demand video stream and download audio recordings. Order online at issuesetc.org.
Your comprehensive source for information, teaching, and truth. You're listening to Issues Etc.
Criticism.
Thank God that it's 5:01 and the show is over.
Commendation.
I am not a Lutheran, but I regularly listen to Issues Etc. and thank you for putting this on the air.
Conundrum.
A Catholic friend has come to our LCMS church, and he said, "Why do you say very God, a very God?" And I couldn't think of a good answer.
The Issues Etc. comment line, 618-223-8382.
This is Molly Hemingway, encouraging you to listen to my favorite podcast, Issues Etc. Every day you get in-depth interviews with host Todd Wilkin asking expert guests substantive, thought-provoking questions on all of the important news and issues of our day. The expert guests are in culture, law, ethics, philosophy, theology, and apologetics. Expert guests, expansive topics, always extolling Christ. Issues, etc.